On the morning of March 4th, 2026, something happened in the Strait of Hormuz that had no precedent in the recorded history of international maritime trade. An Iranian Revolutionary Guard patrol boat intercepted a fully loaded oil tanker and radioed a demand no captain in those waters had ever received. Pay $2 million or turn your vessel around. This was not an act of piracy. This was official Iranian government policy, enforced by uniformed naval officers under direct orders from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, backed by the full military power of a state that physically controls the entrance to the Persian Gulf. Iran had not simply closed the world's most important shipping lane. Iran had turned it into a toll booth. The Strait of Hormuz measures just 33 kilometers across at its narrowest navigable point, a sliver of water separating Iran from the coasts of Oman and the United Arab Emirates. Through that sliver, roughly 20% of all seaborne oil and approximately 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas passes every single day. Before February 28, 2026, approximately 3,000 vessels crossed the strait each month, carrying crude oil, refined fuels, and bulk cargo destined for power stations and factories from Japan to Germany to Brazil. When the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury on that date, assassinating Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and striking dozens of Iranian military facilities, the shipping industry watched in real time as that traffic collapsed. Within 1 month, the number of vessels using the strait had dropped by more than 95%. The world's most important oil corridor had become a problem. To understand how the toll system emerged, you have to understand what happened in the first 72 hours after the war began. On March 2nd, a senior IRGC official stood before cameras and declared the strait closed to all international shipping. Iranian fast attack boats began shadowing commercial vessels throughout the Gulf. The IRGC deployed thousands of naval mines across the navigable channels, with some mines drifting from their intended positions in the weeks that followed. Lloyd's of London suspended war risk insurance for all vessels attempting transit, making it legally and financially impossible for most shipping companies to send their crews into those waters. The Cape of Good Hope route, adding 10 to 14 days and massive fuel costs to every voyage, had become the only viable alternative for most of the world's tanker fleet. A fully closed strait created an immediate problem for Iran as well. Inside the Persian Gulf, hundreds of ships from countries Iran considers friendly had nowhere to go. Malaysian tankers, Pakistani cargo vessels, Chinese-flagged ships, Iraqi oil exporters, and Omani traders were all trapped with no safe exit. Iran needed a mechanism to let the right ships through while blocking American, Israeli, and Allied vessels. The IRGC designed what Lloyd's List would later call the toll booth system. Operators submit vessel details, ownership records, cargo manifests, and flag state to an IRGC clearance office. If approved, the operator pays the fee, set at approximately $2 million per vessel, and receives a single-use transit permit enforced by Iranian patrol boats. By mid-March, 26 vessels had successfully used the system, every one having paid the full fee. Iran's parliament moved to formalize the arrangement with remarkable speed. Legislators introduced a bill to codify the toll into Iranian law, authorizing the IRGC to collect transit fees indefinitely and determine which flag states are eligible. The parliamentary debates were broadcast on state television, with no apparent embarrassment. One lawmaker stated that charging ships was natural because war has costs, and those costs must be shared. Another suggested fees should scale with vessel size, potentially pushing the toll for a supertanker above $5 million per crossing. The legal foundation of Iran's position is more contested than most Western governments want to acknowledge. Under international maritime law, the Strait of Hormuz is governed by the doctrine of transit passage, which grants all ships the right to traverse international straits without interference. Iran has never formally ratified the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Tehran has argued for decades that the doctrine does not apply, because the entire width of the waterway falls within the overlapping territorial waters of Iran and Oman. A maritime law professor at the City University of London summarized the result simply: Iran can legally claim the right to attack any ship in the strait by missiles, mines, or drones. Iran is not just enforcing a toll. Iran is enforcing a theory of sovereignty that, if accepted, eliminates one of the foundational freedoms of modern international trade. The United States responded by establishing its own counter-blockade of Iranian ports on April 13, 2026. Following the collapse of the Islamabad peace talks after 21 hours of negotiations that produced no agreement, the U.S. Navy announced that American warships would intercept all vessels traveling to or from Iranian ports. Within the first 24 hours, more than 10,000 American military personnel aboard over a dozen warships were enforcing the blockade line. The Guardian described the situation as a dual blockade, Iran controlling access from the Gulf outward, and the United States controlling access to Iran inward. The world's most critical energy corridor had become a standoff zone between two opposing military forces, with nearly 2,000 commercial vessels waiting on both sides for a resolution that showed no sign of arriving. The economic consequences were not contained to the Strait of Hormuz. American households absorbed an average of $284 in additional fuel costs since the war began, according to Brown University researchers. Brent crude oil is trading at roughly $105 per barrel, approximately $20 above its pre-war price. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude crossed $100 per barrel in early May for the first time since 2022. Airlines quietly rerouted long-haul cargo flights around the Indian Ocean, adding fuel expenses that show up in slowly rising ticket prices. The toll booth Iran established is not a dispute between shipping companies and a foreign government. It is a tax on the entire global economy, collected at one narrow point in the water by a force that answers to no international authority. Iran's formal peace proposal, delivered through Pakistani mediators in early May, made the logic of the toll permanent. Tehran's counterproposal included, as a non-negotiable condition, formal international recognition of Iranian sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. The proposal also demanded war reparations, the lifting of all sanctions, and the release of $6 billion in frozen assets. President Trump read it and called the response from Iran's so-called representatives totally unacceptable. Iran's foreign ministry called the American proposal a demand for surrender. President Pezeshkian posted that Iran would never bow its head before the enemy. The ceasefire Pakistan had brokered in April was, by mid-May, described by Trump himself as being on massive life support. If Iran secures formal recognition of its sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz, the consequences for international maritime law would be irreversible. Every nation whose economy depends on Gulf energy, Japan, South Korea, India, China, the entire European Union, would be forced to acknowledge Iran's right to charge, restrict, or close the waterway at will. The precedent would not stop at Hormuz. If one state converts an international strait into a sovereign toll corridor through military enforcement, the same logic becomes available to any state controlling a narrow body of water anywhere on the planet. The Strait of Malacca would become a theoretical Malaysian toll zone. The Bab el-Mandeb would become a potential Eritrean revenue stream. The toll booth Iran established is a precedent the international order, as it has existed since 1982, cannot survive intact. China's position is the most diplomatically uncomfortable of any major power involved. Chinese vessels have been among those using the IRGC vetting system, paying the toll and normalizing the fee as a cost of doing business. Xi Jinping met with Donald Trump on May 14th, and both agreed the strait must remain open to support the free flow of energy. Yet China also opposed the militarization of the strait, putting Beijing in theoretical opposition to both the Iranian toll system and the American naval blockade simultaneously. China needs Gulf oil, cannot afford to visibly help the United States force Iran's hand, and has strong reasons to oppose any precedent turning narrow waterways into sovereign toll zones. Beijing has spent years asserting territorial claims over the South China Sea that the world has refused to accept. China is watching Iran's toll booth with the private anxiety of a government that has made similar arguments itself and needs this one to fail. Inside Iran, the toll system has become a symbol of national resistance and strategic vindication. State television broadcasts footage of patrol boats escorting approved tankers, describing the fee as rightful compensation for decades of American sanctions. Street posters in Tehran depict the strait gripped in an Iranian fist, with slogans asserting ownership of the waterway. IRGC commanders hold press conferences in front of Gulf maps, pointing at choke points with the confidence of officers who believe they have converted geography into permanent political leverage. For the IRGC, the toll booth represents something more valuable than revenue. It is proof that Iran can hold the world's energy supply hostage with a patrol boat and a radio. Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei, hidden at an undisclosed location due to Israeli targeting threats, has issued written statements through intermediaries, affirming the toll policy as a core position of the Islamic Republic. Senior IRGC commanders have stated that regardless of how the broader war concludes, the Strait of Hormuz's legal status will not return to its pre-war condition. The IRGC commanders, who form the real decision-making council around a supreme leader they have effectively made into a figurehead, are not deterred by American or Israeli threats. They believe they have already won the most important battle of this war, not with missiles or aircraft, but with a patrol boat, a radio, and a demand for $2 million. For the shipping industry, the human reality is measured in the exhaustion of captains sitting at anchor, watching operating costs accumulate, while negotiations produce nothing. Nearly 2,000 vessels are waiting on both sides of the strait, according to the International Maritime Organization. Inside the Persian Gulf, 230 loaded oil tankers sit at anchor with cargo they cannot deliver. During a brief window in late April, when both sides claimed the strait was open, 6 cruise ships trapped inside the Gulf raced through in a matter of hours. Every other vessel is still waiting. The toll booth has been operating for more than 2 months, and the world is still paying. The most consequential question this crisis raises is not whether Iran can maintain the toll system. The IRGC's capacity to enforce its authority through mines, patrol boats, and missiles is not seriously disputed. The real question is whether the international community will allow a precedent in which a nation-state converts a recognized international strait into a taxed, sovereign-controlled waterway through military force. If the answer is yes, the legal architecture governing international maritime trade, built over 4 decades and underwriting trillions in annual commerce, will have a permanent exception carved into it by Iranian gunboats in 33 kilometers of water. If the answer is no, someone has to force Iran to abandon that precedent, and so far no government on earth has demonstrated both the will and the capacity to do it. The toll booth is open. Whether it stays open will define the Strait of Hormuz for the next 50 years.